my pleasure to introduce Dr. Timothy Smith. He is the president and CEO of StudyMetrix Research in St. Louis, Missouri. He is a pharmacist, internal medicine physician, headache specialist, researcher, consultant, and healthcare business owner and executive. Dr. Smith's accomplishments in the field of headache medicine are vast and varied. He has been an investigator for more than 800 clinical trials and original research projects and is credited with over 40 peer-reviewed publications. He has been awarded several recognitions in the field of headache management, including the American Headache Society's Kaplan Award for Research and the National Headache Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award. He is also the first vice president of the National Headache Foundation and a member of the NHF Board of Directors. Dr. Smith, it's a pleasure to see you again. We had a great time talking with you in April and looking forward to your talk today.
But I appreciate the kind remarks, and it's good to connect with everyone again since April. And just wanted to thank Champ and the meeting organizers for the opportunity to reconnect and talk about another exciting topic. The title, as you can see on the screen, is I Want a New Drug, to borrow a phrase from Huey Lewis and the News. For those of you that remember the 80s, this sort of has new meaning nowadays, and different meaning obviously from the song. But the future of migraine treatment is what we're talking about today. The last time we got together, we talked about new treatments that are currently being marketed. And the reason this is so important is because for many years we have had, we've gone for long stretches, decades of time without new significant treatments being brought to the marketplace. And now to have new treatments coming into the market so that we can get access to those, it's been very heartening, and it's been an exciting time for migraine and other disabling headache disorders. My message today is the future looks maybe even brighter. There's a lot of potential out there, and we don't want treatments that just make us care less about our pain. Well, we want treatments that take our pain away and reverse migraine attacks. A few months ago, I talked with you all about the rapid growth in these new treatments for migraine, and I pointed out that we're in the middle of a 5-year cycle in which we have several new treatments, new preventive pharmacologic treatments, new abortive therapies, and even new neuromodulation devices. And we're about halfway through that cycle. There's 8, 9, or 10 new products on the market just in the last 2.5 years, and new indications for products and devices. So this has been just super exciting. And, you know, coming from a migraine family and having so many people in my clinic and in my family that struggle with this, and having migraine myself, it's, it's been a long time coming, and we're super excited about it. And we know that these new treatments, and I shared a lot of this with you last time, the new preventive treatments, the CGRP monoclonal antibodies, we see those there, 4 of them. We're all familiar with them by this time. And then the small molecule CGRP blockers, the GPANTs, that have 2 of them have been marketed with still more preventive I beg your pardon, the CGRP blockers for prevention are not yet marketed, but they're in the research pathway. But there are 2 that are marketed for acute therapy, and that'll be on the next slide, which I'm showing you now. And we start with those. You'll recognize a couple of names there. Those of you that keep up with this, high visibility marketed products for acute therapy of migraine. And some more on the way is Zavegepant we talked about before. This is all sort of a recap of what we talked about back in April. And just to update things along the way, we know that Ubrelvy and Nurtec or ODT are on the market. Lasmiditan or Rayvow is on the market now. Trials are under the way for Zavegepant. Tosymra has been marketed. The others that you see at the bottom, toward the bottom of the screen, have not been marketed yet. but are in various stages of development. A couple of them are getting very close. The celecoxib oral solution actually got marketed a couple of months back under the brand name of Elixib. The STS-101 DHE powder nasal spray had some disappointing results in the clinical trials, and I'm not sure which direction they're going to go in. The M207 zolmitriptan intracutaneous microneedle system is the anticipated Qtripta brand. Has not been approved by the FDA yet. They had a complete response letter and they've required some more data. So the company is quickly trying to develop a strategy and think about their next moves to get that that product to market. And you see the other combination products back there have already marketed drugs. So these are all of the abortive and acute medicines. We talked about the preventives. There are neuromodulation devices recently marketed or had updated approvals. Cephally is approved for prevention and acute treatment for migraine. GammaCore is interestingly approved for acute and prophylactic or preventive management of migraine, and also for acute management and preventive management of cluster headache. So that's a very exciting neuromodulation device that some people have been able to access and use and get benefit from that. The Spring TMS product was a transcranial magnetic stimulator. You may remember that's the one that goes on the back of the head for those of you who have looked at this. Unfortunately, the company that has marketed that has filed for bankruptcy. And the last time I checked, this product's not being supported by any pharmacy or device manufacturers. So people who have used that successfully are probably going to have problems getting access to it unless another company comes in and markets it. And then the newest one on the list is Nerivio. This is the remote electrical neuromodulation device, the one that fits on the arm like a blood pressure cuff, and you control with your phone to stimulate, and it sends those nerve signals to the brainstem, kind of creates crosstalk and diminishes the pain signaling to the brain. And this one, the new news on it since April is it has gotten FDA authorization for treatment of chronic migraine as an acute therapy. So it's not a preventive, it's an acute therapy. So that's kind of a, sort of a recap of what we talked about last time. But the big question is, what are the new targets, new strategies that researchers are looking at for the next phase of treatments? The new drug we want. Where are we on that? Well, the one potential migraine treatment approach that's gotten a lot of attention and is entering into clinical trials or has been into clinical trials so far is this thing called PACAP38. It's Pituitary Adenylate Cyclase activating peptide. That's a mouthful. The name is not important. What it does is, and that is, it's an inflammatory vasodilating protein. Sounds familiar, kind of sounds like CGRP, right? So if we can block this, perhaps this PACAP38, then perhaps we could bring about a reduction in migraine severity, frequency, improve quality of life, improve responsiveness to acute therapies. We know that PACAP38 is involved in that inflammation and neuromodulation. Neuromodulation means suppression of pain in the brainstem, and it's present in many brain tracts and nuclei that are involved in the migraine process. And we know that experimental infusions, if you take PACAP38, similar to what we saw with CGRP, and you infuse that into a patient, especially in migraine sufferers, you can induce a migraine attack. Horrible thing to do, I know, but experimentally, if you do that, 83% of patients in one study developed a migraine. So we know that this is involved in migraine production. We know it lives in the brain and the brain tracts that are involved in migraine pathophysiology. And furthermore, we have other evidence of increased levels of this that have been seen during spontaneous migraine attacks. If you take blood that's draining out of the brain through the jugular vein and measure these levels, we see it go up during attacks. And then if you can treat that attack adequately and use something like sumatriptan, for example, and that's what was used in the studies to make the migraine go away, we see those PACAP38 levels going down. So that's very exciting, and it's the basis for which we are investigating compounds that can inhibit this protein. Interestingly, this is not linked to CGRP levels. We speculate, or some people speculate, that the PACAP38 approach might work in patients who don't respond to CGRP blocking medications. So that's kind of an exciting notion. We're still trying to prove that, but if it's not linked to CGRP, but it is linked to migraine, then it stands to reason that if you can inhibit that molecule or its receptor that it attaches to, then you could potentially have a migraine preventive or potentially a migraine acute therapy. So this one is probably, of the molecules I'm going to talk about today, this approach has probably the most advanced science behind it, and maybe closest to getting migraine trials done and get market approval for it. I have some clinical trials. There are no candidate molecules in clinical trials at this moment, but there's one that's very close. We did do, probably, I think it was last year or year before last, we did do a trial of a product called, a molecule called AMG 301, which was a antibody that blocked the PAC1 receptor. And that's the receptor that PACAP38 binds to. And I don't want to get too nerdy and sciencey on this, but basically it was a way of blocking this inflammatory protein's mechanism of action, the way it works. Unfortunately, in that trial, it did not meet, the study did not meet its primary endpoints. And so further work on that particular molecule has been put on hold. And I don't know if we'll revisit it, but there's a second candidate molecule called ALD 1910, and it binds directly to PACAP38. So it's not the receptor, it's a different approach. It binds the actual molecule itself. So it's a little different mechanism, but same system that we're trying to affect. And we should be starting studies on that within the next year, we think. And if clinical trials are successful, then perhaps we'll have a marketed product in another 4 or 5 years. If we get really, really lucky and have some great data, it might be shorter than that. But realistically, that's what we're talking about. The next target I wanted to mention is something called delta opioid receptors. And the delta opioid receptors are related to mu opioid receptors. Now, the mu opioid receptor, there's 3 kinds of opioid receptors. The mu receptor is the one that's the target for the marketed opioid painkillers that are on the market now, that are just dull people's senses and try to knock them out or diminish their pain through just a dulling of the entire pain processing system. And we know the problems with those medications. And so it's one of the reasons we do what we do. We're trying to find new and better ways of treating pain without resorting to the opioid mechanism. So when we talk about delta opioid, this is it's a horse of a different color. The delta opioid receptors are completely different from the mu opioid receptors. And specifically by that, I mean, they do mitigate, if you stimulate them, they do decrease chronic pain and neuropathic pain. And the big plus is that third bullet there: no abuse, no addiction, no common opioid side effect issues. So if you can mitigate pain in a very effective way, but not have those abuse issues and the overdose issues that we see with the mu opioid agonists, this could be a good pathway to attack. And we know that these delta opioid receptors are in important pathways associated with migraine. And they, interestingly, have also been shown to be involved in the emotional aspects of pain. And we don't talk about that very much, but we We know that there's a physical component of pain, there's a neurologic component of pain, and there's also an emotional component of pain. And we don't have medications that treat all of that. But if we could treat the pain pathways, the nociceptive pathways that tell the brain that you're having pain, you have an injury, or you have something that needs to be corrected, and you could also treat that emotional aspect of the pain as well, that could be a double plus for us. There are some delta agonist molecules that have been developed, and they've been studied in some arenas, mental health issues, arthritis, and for neuropathy. They've had some mixed results, but a lot of researchers feel that they're better suited for migraine treatment. And there has been one phase 1 migraine study with a delta opioid agonist called TRV-250, and it showed no safety issues or side effects, but it's too small and wasn't designed to show therapeutic benefit. So we have to wait for phase 2 trials probably to get that signal, but it's encouraging to know that that's out there and seems to be well tolerated and presents a novel approach to the treatment of migraine. Other studies are going to follow, and I expect there could be marketed products in 5 or 6 years, but that's just my guess. And the third opioid receptor is something called Kappa opioid receptors, and we are wondering about agonists or inhibitors on this. We know that the Kappa opioid receptors are involved in brain function, especially pain, and also in the emotion centers. And we know that this stimulation of the Kappa opioid receptors has some side effect issues. And what was noted in some early trials was that stimulating the Kappa opioid receptors led to some psychosis, dysphoria, and believe it or not, headache induction. So we know that they don't share features with mu opioid, the bad opioid. It can be helpful to take narcotics or opioids, don't get me wrong, but all the downside prevents us from being able to use them efficiently. But the good news is Kappa opioid receptors don't have any shared function with mu opioid receptors, a good thing, just like the delta opioid receptors. But the Kappa, when we notice the induction of headache with stimulation, the natural thing is to think about what if we inhibit that? Are there some benefits from that? And the good news is there has been some research on Kappa opioid inhibitors, and they've been researched in anxiety, depression, drug abuse, and relapse. And they've been noted through those studies to decrease something we call allodynia. Many of you may be familiar with that term, and what it means is allodynia comes from the Greek root words or Latin root words of allo, other, dynia, pain. So it means pain from a non-painful source. So heightened pain from a non-painful event is what allodynia is. And we know a lot of our chronic migraine patients and other disabling headache disorder patients do have a lot of this allodynia. And it was noted in these trials for anxiety, depression, drug abuse, and relapse that Kappa opioid inhibitors could decrease that allodynia. So that was an encouraging sign. And we take it that it may be very important for headache care, including potentially medication overuse headache or rebound headache, which has been a struggle for many people. No specific studies yet, but we have our eyes and ears open, and we're interested in that. And hopefully new trials will be coming down the pike for us. The orexin receptors are potentially important in migraine production. This is a protein in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a deep primordial area of the brain that governs things like appetite and cravings and energy management and wakefulness. And it has some indirect connections to pain and that allodynia thing we were just talking about. We know that in animal models, there's a strain of mice. It's called orexin knockout mice, and what they don't possess the gene to produce orexin in their system. So we can see what it looks like if animals don't have orexin in their system, and the absence of orexin in these models show that inflammation and pain can be enhanced. So it makes sense that if you could, increase the activity at the orexin or the orexin receptors and produce an orexin agonist, then you could potentially help people with their pain. And the potential targets for migraine, cluster, post-traumatic headache, and even TMJ disorder. And, you know, we don't talk a lot about trials on post-traumatic headache and TMJ, and very few on cluster. Migraine gets a lot of attention, but there are a lot of people that suffer from these other disorders. And this is a potential approach that may help all of those different problems. The good news also is there are some orexin receptor agonists that are in study. DORA 12 is one that was developed for sleep, but it's been shown to decrease allodynia and prevent something called cortical spreading depression. That's an electrical wave that proceeds across the brain that's a heralding event for migraine for many patients. And so if this product blocks that and blocks allodynia, then perhaps it has some migraine benefit as well. One other orexin receptor agonist called filarexant was studied in a small pilot migraine trial, and it didn't work. But the investigators went back and looked at it. They think they may have used an inadequate dose. So more studies needed on that. But that's the orexin pathway. There's another pathway, the nitric oxide pathway, and this has been of interest for many years. And I go back probably 10, 15 more years that nitric oxide has been talked about. Nitric oxide is abbreviated NO, kind of an interesting, maybe not coincidental connection there. It's a natural chemical that occurs in many human tissues, but it's known to be involved in blood vessel tone, pain transmission, and also in immune deficiencies. And we also know it's a migraine inducer. And actually, when patients take nitroglycerin, we know that that gives them a horrible headache. And as it turns out, nitric oxide is given off from that chemical, and that's how patients wind up with these terrible throbbing headaches that sound like migraine. There's one called, the synthetic enzyme that produces nitric oxide is called nitric oxide synthase. And there are 3 different versions of this. We studied the inducible nitric oxide synthase a few years back. It's a target for migraine relief, but it was only partially successful as an acute migraine, wasn't very impressive. And then it was studied twice as a preventive agent in 2 trials that I was one of the investigators on, and it failed in delivering on those. So now we're back to the drawing board, but it looks like a different nitric oxide synthase inhibition might be the way to go. It's something called neuronal nitric oxide synthase. And it's shown a little bit of promise in migraine and rebound headaches or medication overuse headache, and especially if it's used in combination with a triptan. So there's more that we need to know about that, and we're going to follow up, and we'll be sure to keep you posted and give you updates through Retreat Migraine and future iterations as these things come about. Glutamate transporter is a brain protein that takes an excitatory neurotransmitter. This is a glutamate, which propagates migraine signaling, and the glutamate transporter takes it out of the nerve connection. It removes this migraine promoter from the nerve connections. And so if you can get that out of there, potentially you could diminish migraine. Still a lot of work that's going on that. Basic lab and computer studies are ongoing. We don't have any human use yet, but it is a down the road future target that has some promise. And this is interesting. It sounds horrible, but it's the acid sensing ion channel. And this is a special neuronal channel that is known to be in some of the pain producing and other areas of the brain that are responsible for cortical spreading depression, that spreading electrical wave that heralds migraine, and maybe the experimental correlate to migraine aura. Whether you realize you're having an aura or not, this is going on. And there's a medication that's been around for a long time. It's called amiloride, and it's been shown to block an acid sensing ion channel, or an ASIC1, they call it. And that has been shown to block this cortical spreading depression. And it's also been shown to inhibit trigeminal activation in migraine models. And the trigeminal nerve is sort of the migraine nerve. It innervates the lining of the brain and the blood vessels through the brain. And so if you can inhibit that activation, it could be an anti-migraine treatment. And there's been one small pilot study, only 7 subjects, 7 patients in it, and it did reduce aura and headache symptoms in 4 of them. So it's a small study that could be that this may not be translatable to bigger studies, but more study is needed. But we're excited to know about these new potential agents that are out there. This one is another mouthful. It's the transient receptor potential cation channel subfamily V member 1, or we call it TRPV1. It's also known as capsaicin receptors or vanilloid receptors. It's involved in pain production and enhancement. It's currently being looked at, and some new studies starting on things like anxiety, osteoarthritis, and neuropathy. And we are hoping that migraine studies are going to pop up, but it looks to be suited well as a migraine treatment. So if we can study that, research is underway in those other models, but we'll come back to it. Endocannabinoid, this will sound familiar to you. The cannabinoids are the compounds that are in marijuana. Interestingly, we do have endocannabinoid. That means internal cannabinoid receptors in our tissues and in our central nervous systems. And this is probably, and there are 2 types, CB1 and CB2. And we know that if you can stimulate them, then you can have anticonvulsive, analgesic, anti-nausea, and anti-inflammatory effects, promising compound, maybe for acute and prophylactic treatment of migraine. Blocks pain trafficking signals and may reduce the brain excitability that predisposes patients to migraine attacks. And then the CB2 receptors are in immune cells, and they can be targeted to reduce the inflammatory component in the severe forms of migraine, we think. So those are the molecules, the different approaches we wanted to throw out there at you today. I know there's a lot of scientific jargon involved in some of that, but I just wanted you to know about these different targets that we're looking at, because the future of migraine and pain management requires that we never, ever give up on our pursuit of better and safer treatments. It's what drives researchers and people like me to continue to keep our nose to the grindstone and looking for potential helpful things to do. And one of the main reasons is because we don't want to have to rely on opioids. This is the opium poppy. You can see the extract oozing out from incisions that have been made on that bulb there. And we know that opioids are a major problem. And every time we can develop a new non-opioid treatment, we can mitigate some of the things that you see on this slide, the narcotic overdose deaths that have increased 300+% over the last couple of decades, and the hundreds of thousands of people that have died from drug overdoses. You see several of them on this slide. These are the famous ones you may have heard about. Older people like me might recognize Lenny Bruce and Hank Williams Sr. and Janis Joplin and some of the others on this page. And maybe the younger folks might recognize Amy Winehouse and others here. The fact is that everybody is aware of these high-profile cases, but we also, many of us are aware of people closer to us in our normal walks of life. And this handsome young fireman here is my nephew, Tyler. And Tyler had a back injury and unfortunately got addicted to opioids and tragically died at home about 2.5 years ago from an opioid overdose, died in his bed at home. And it was such a devastating thing. He died at age 30. It's just such a horrible thing. And cases like this and having something like this close to me personally motivates me even more to want to find treatments that can move people away from those opioid-based products. And I'll leave you with this C.S. Lewis quote from his book, The Problem of Pain. It says, "When pain is to be borne, a little courage helps more than knowledge, a little human sympathy more than much courage, and the least tincture of the love of God more than all." So it's words, stimulates words, and I'll leave you with Samuel L. Jackson. And thank you for your attention. And perhaps I can welcome back the moderator back into the space.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. That was a lot of incredible information, and just extending felt condolences for your loss of your nephew Tyler. It's certainly something that's touched everyone I know in one way or another. So happy to see that there are hopefully some options in the future for us to go and provide other solutions for people. So we do have some time to answer questions if you're available to keep going. One of the top questions that we got was, what effect has COVID had on clinical trials for these and other new migraine treatments?
The coronavirus has been a drag on clinical trial timelines, and you can imagine in March, when all clinical trial centers, many of them just temporarily shut down, some permanently, because it's hard to sustain these clinical trial centers are businesses after all. And without good business generation, they can't stay open. Many centers like mine lost a lot of clinical trials. A lot of them were put on hold. The good news is we seem to be recovering now. And the hope is we'll be back at full speed soon. And a lot of these clinical trials that have been delayed for 6 months or more will be starting back up soon.
That's good to hear. And another question that came up when you were mentioning the PCAP38 receptor, I know you said that it's not related to CGRP, but several people were wondering if this would be considered a safe option for those who cannot tolerate CGRPs, and if we know that.
Yeah, we don't have enough information to comment on that at this moment. We have the one compound that did get through some phase 2 trials, and the safety data looked really good. The effectiveness just was not great, but we did not specifically recruit patients that didn't tolerate or didn't get success from CGRP. We just know biochemically it seems to be unrelated to CGRP levels when we look at those.
Okay, thank you for that. And then another question that came up from a few people is, have any studies tried looking at people who have had multiple headache disorders, such as both migraine and cluster, or other complex cases to find help? Maybe there's something more going on for those folks.
That's a great question. And the answer is no, unfortunately. Clinical trials focus on one entity at a time. And so it's quite exclusionary for us to enroll patients. Say, for example, if a patient has migraine and they also have cluster headache, we don't put them into clinical trials. Part of that is just because we're trying to keep things simple and straightforward and minimize confounding variables. And then part of it is also because the FDA wants a pure population. They don't want us studying patients. So if you don't get better from a treatment, is it because you only treated one entity and the other didn't resolve? And it's really hard to sort out. So just because of the confounding variables and the FDA rules, we unfortunately at this time don't put people in with mixed headache disorders into clinical trials.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense from that perspective. So one last question I have for you is a little bit more on a personal note. After 50 years of service to the headache and migraine community, Mary Franklin, the executive director of the National Headache Foundation, is going on a very well-deserved retirement. Can you share a memory about working with her or give her a warm send-off with us now?
Well, so I couldn't even begin to start. Mary's one of my favorite people, and she is so well known to everyone in the advocacy, world for headache disorders. She has been to every major advocacy meeting or conference, and she's been to Headache on the Hill and lobbied to the legislature and insurance companies and pharmaceutical manufacturers to try and make lives better. And besides that, she's just, one of if you've ever been around her, you know she always has lots of energy, and she's got a great sense of humor, and she's just a very wonderful person. She's like a sister to me, I'll say, and I love her very much. And she is retiring from the National Headache Foundation as the executive director. And as she says, I'm not going anywhere, but we'll miss being engaged with her all the time. A couple of personal things, though. She's a great American Civil War historian. You folks may not know that, but it's been a sort of a hobby of mine to think about and read about and study the American Civil War too. And so we've had great conversations about that. And she's also Irish too, which you look at these eyes and you know these are Irish eyes, and we've got that commonality too. But just a wonderful person, and we just couldn't love her more and couldn't wish her more joy and happiness in her retirement. And she's going to be staying with that wonderful little granddaughter of hers a lot more these days. So I know that's going to bring her lots of joy. So anyway, thank you for remembering her, though. She's just awesome, and we'll miss being with her at events like this. I think she's going to be on the program tomorrow, the next day. So your viewership shouldn't miss that.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. She's just an absolute gem and mighty force. It'll be huge shoes to fill, I'm sure, but we all love her, and hopefully for those of you in the audience, you'll get to tune in. So thank you again, Dr. Smith, for this excellent presentation. You really do an incredible job of making this complicated science jargon so digestible for many. So we really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks again, Dr. Smith.
Thank you.
Our coalition is working together to solve the challenge of migraine and headache diseases and support patients wherever they are on their patient journey. None of this would have been possible without the generous support of our sponsors, who helped us bring Retreat Migraine to life digitally this year and support hope, community, and advocacy at such an important time.